This is R1 and 3 Autoethnography with your host, Steven. On this episode, I interview Veronica, who's an education student here at the university. Before we get started, though, I'm going to warn you that this episode contains detailed accounts of self-harm, suicide, and sexual violence, so I think you should avoid this episode if any of that content may be triggering, and you should see your doctor if you're concerned about your mental well-being.
I'm Veronica. I am a third-year education student. I also have a diploma in fashion design and merchandising from the Art Institute of Vancouver. I lived in Vancouver for 7 years, but I grew up in Saskatoon, and I moved back here and decided to do my degree. My long-term goal with my degree is to do a master's in educational psychology and to be a child and youth psychologist and to also do psychoeducational assessments.
So today you wanted to speak primarily about bipolar type 2 and PTSD, right?
Yeah. So my initial diagnosis was major depressive disorder and I guess anxiety because I had panic attacks, but I had also had PTSD, which I was eventually diagnosed with by my psychiatrist at the school. Then I was on antidepressants and then found out that I actually had bipolar 2. And then I had some trauma-related OCD. And then I also found out that I have ADHD.
Or how did this all start for you? Your whole I guess, journey working through and knowing that you have these mental illnesses?
So as a teenager, I had anorexia, and that was related to depression. My parents fought a lot when I was growing up, and I probably also had really low self-esteem. And basically, I wanted to die. Like, I wanted my eating disorder to kill me. And then I ended up taking a lot of pills and having to go to the hospital. And I had to drink that charcoal stuff. And then they let me go home. And over time, the eating disorder went into remission, but I still had depression. I was put on antidepressants. I was on Wellbutrin for 5 years. And looking back on it, I had like elevated mood and then suicidally depressed mood. But at the time, I didn't recognize it, so I didn't tell anyone about it. And then I was in a relationship that was very traumatic. And at the beginning of this relationship, the person that I was with gave me herpes, and he didn't tell me about it. And then him and a friend did stuff to me while I was high and laying on the floor, and I told them no and pushed them away. And so they did some things to me, like not actual sex, but sexual things. And I didn't do anything about it then. And then later in my relationship, my boyfriend started forcing me to have anal sex with him, and I didn't want to do that, and he would threaten me with like physical violence. He threw me into a wall once, things like that. Or else he would just say no one else would want to be with you. and like that he would break up with me if I didn't do it. And then eventually, like, he wanted me to sleep with other people, and I didn't want to do that either. I didn't end up like actually having sex with anyone. And the herpes, I would have to tell them about it. I wouldn't ever do anything that like I wouldn't ever want to give it to anyone, even by accident. So I would always want to tell the person. So anyway, like, no actual sex with other people, but sexual stuff. And I didn't want to do that either. And so then at the end of the relationship, he held me down by the neck and forced me to have anal sex with him. And he was really hurting me, and I was crying. I told him to stop, and he wouldn't stop, and he just held me down until he came. And so the next day, I woke up and had a panic attack in the shower, and that was the start of my panic attacks. And then he took me to the SkyTrain and dropped me off, and then broke up with me by text message. So that led to some PTSD and depression and anxiety for sure, and panic attacks.
You good?
Yeah. After this happened, about a month later, I did try to commit suicide, and actually I had seen my acupuncturist and she knew, and I had been text messaging with her, and then I stopped. And then she had actually been really worried about me because she knew that I was considering suicide, and she called the police, and I was laying on my bed, and they took me to the hospital, and I saw a psychiatrist there, but I didn't tell her what had happened, and they just let me go. So my parents found out about that, and they were very worried. So that's why I ended up moving home. And then I didn't really tell anyone, like I didn't tell my parents or anything like that. I didn't see a therapist until my mom was really upset one morning, and my dad had got angry with her in the night about her panic attacks. And I knew all along growing up that she was very claustrophobic and couldn't be in enclosed spaces, that she would have panic. I had never seen it, but I just knew that, and I didn't know why. But I asked my mom about what happened, and she ended up telling me, I asked if her panic was about something that had happened to her, because I had this idea that I knew my panic was about what that had happened to me. And she told me about her childhood trauma, and that's why she had the panic. So then I told her about my trauma, and she said, that sounds like PTSD. And then I ended up getting referred to a therapist from my family doctor.
How hard was that for you?
I think knowing that I probably had a diagnosis of PTSD was actually helpful, because it legitimized my trauma in a way that at the time there wasn't a lot of stuff out there about consent, especially like sexual violence in relationships, and that he was my boyfriend, and that I had consented to sex with him before, but that didn't mean that I consented to any of that. But having eventually getting a diagnosis and having people that like acknowledged that that was a traumatic experience and that I had gone through a lot of trauma, was actually helpful for my mind.
Mm-hmm. And that's really good to hear. I know that earlier you mentioned some of these other diagnoses, and obviously they're not all in isolation. And we're going to revisit this stuff about PTSD, but how did the other diagnoses, how did that work, I guess?
Yeah. So do you want the whole story or do you want...
Go ahead. We got all the time in the world.
So, I went through a bunch of therapists because my suicidal thoughts came up and the therapist didn't feel qualified to deal with that.
And sorry, was this after the trauma or
after
before?
The trauma?
Okay.
No therapy happened before the trauma or during the trauma. I didn't tell anyone what was going on. It was just, I kept it all inside. And even after I kept it inside until I told my mom, and she encouraged me to seek some therapy. So I saw quite a few therapists at Mental Health and Addictions. So you can get referred there and see someone for free. And basically I ended up with a therapist that was a specialist in trauma, but none of it really healed the PTSD or even helped. I had panic attacks in their bathroom. Like, it was just, nothing helped. It almost made it worse. And then I started university. My previous therapist was a mentor to one of the therapists here, so she recommended me to her. She is still my therapist, and she's amazing. And my therapist, about 2 years into our therapy, she noticed that in some ways things were getting better. Like, I was developing relationships with people, which can be difficult for people with trauma. But in some ways it was getting worse for me, and my panic was getting worse. My depression was getting worse. My suicidal thoughts were getting really bad. And then I started like burning myself and cutting myself, and I didn't know why then, like why all of a sudden years later this started. So she referred me to a psychiatrist, and it was for the PTSD and the depression and the anxiety. And I was put on Prozac, and I was seeing a different therapist, and I ended up like cutting my arms and legs open in her bathroom after therapy. And the police had to come, and my dad had to come pick me up. Like stuff like that happening. And my psychiatrist tried a different antidepressant, and I was just really sleepy and then very agitated. And then I was put on a third antidepressant, and I was so agitated and calling the sexual assault center, and they told me I should go to the hospital. I spoke to an outreach counselor at the school, and he said the same thing, go to the hospital. And eventually I had like such bad agitation and like pressured rapid speech that my mom said, I think I should take you to the hospital. And I agreed, because I was just like, something is so wrong with me, and I didn't know what it was. So I was in the hospital for that night, and they added a mood stabilizer to my current medications, my antidepressants, and I didn't fill that prescription. And then my psychiatrist called me saying that I should take a different mood stabilizer. And the next time I saw her, she said that I had bipolar type 2 because the antidepressants were triggering hypomania in me.
Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to like stop your story.
I think that's it.
Oh, okay. You know, that time where you, I don't remember how you put it, but where you were hurt yourself in your therapist's office, what were you feeling at that time?
I felt like she was leaving me in the middle of the trauma. Like the trauma felt like it was actually happening to me. We were doing a type of therapy that puts you back in the trauma, but everyone I've talked to said she wasn't really doing it properly. And that had happened to me for the last 7 sessions. And I was just so upset that I wanted to kill myself and like smash something and cut myself open because I was looking for like some sort of thing that I could take in her bathroom that would kill me, that was poisonous, and there was nothing in there. Clearly, it's a psychiatry and psychology office. But so yeah, I was just really upset and in the trauma, like it was happening to me.
What does that feel like when you're, I mean, is it like you can revisit it in a way, like
it's
visuals
happening?
And
yes, like it's happening to me in my body. Like the physical sensations are like it's happening to me, and I feel distressed and panicked. I don't know where I am, and it's like it's happening to you again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what PTSD is, that you certain triggers and you re-experience the trauma. In a traumatic event, your brain goes into fight or flight, which we've all probably heard about, and it's like fight, flight, or freeze. I think at the time of my trauma, I was frozen. Like I was very shocked about this and I couldn't move. And I think what my body wanted to do was run. And I think that at the end, so I had done propranolol, which is the therapy for PTSD, and you take propranolol, which slows your heart, and write about the trauma, and that's supposed to get you into the trauma. And the person you're doing it with, like a psychiatrist, will ask you more questions to get you into the trauma. But the propranolol is stopping that panic response. And then you take it again after the therapy. And so it treats that panic response. But what happened for me, and I think it's because I had all these underlying conditions that weren't treated, is that I just had these racing thoughts, and that was the bipolar. And I just had racing trauma thoughts for 2 weeks. And then I had a really big panic attack at school. I was in my professor's office. I didn't know where I was. I was crying. I was screaming. And I had gone to her office because she knew what it was, because I was getting triggered by some of the books we were reading. So, and basically what happened is that she was walking me to student wellness, and I just ran down the ramp and ran outside, and it was like -50, and then it was done. And I turned around and came back, tried to talk to someone. It wasn't my therapist and didn't go well, and then called my dad to come pick me up.
You also mentioned the bipolar type 2, so how would you say that would affect your PTSD or panic attacks?
So it was really just preventing like healing from the trauma, because the trauma got linked to the bipolar. And when I was hypomanic, like I'd go through the good feelings and just go past that ceiling into agitation and irritability, and all my agitation and irritability was about the trauma. So they got linked together, and one couldn't heal without the other healing. And I think now that I'm finally on medication and stable on it, is now the trauma can begin to heal and has begun healing. And that I can work on it more without being sent into those racing thoughts, the rage, the agitation, or the panic. And the medication that helped me with the panic was lamotrigine, which I take for bipolar, and it's a mood stabilizer, but it works on serotonin and dopamine, and serotonin is what would work for panic, like usually an SSRI. So this helped, and I'm so happy it helped, and that I don't have panic attacks every day anymore. You had asked me about my diagnoses, that like I was so resistant to the diagnoses of bipolar. And after 3 antidepressants that didn't work for me, I didn't want to be on this mood stabilizer. I hadn't really recognized that I had elevated moods. I was mostly depressed, which is characteristic of bipolar type 2. And I didn't have hypomania until I was on these antidepressants. And that's very common for people with bipolar to get diagnosed when antidepressants trigger their hypomania. And you're nodding because the same thing happened to you. And it happens to so many people.
I hate to cut you off.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Why do you think you were resistant to the bipolar diagnosis?
I just didn't think I had it because I didn't have elevated moods and I didn't go like do crazy things or like spend all my money or like all the things they talk about with mania. I didn't do those things. But
so what exactly like did you feel when your psychiatrist was like, yeah, I think this is bipolar type 2?
Initially, I did actually kind of agree with her because the Wellbutrin experience was like that for me. But then I didn't take the meds because after I didn't believe it anymore. And I was like, I have PTSD and I'm depressed. Like I could accept those things. I could accept the anxiety, but I couldn't accept that. And also I thought that the meds would make me fat and sedated, which they don't. But that was my fear that I had heard that medications for bipolar can cause weight gain and like sedation. And I just didn't want to be fat and sedated, in my words. So I didn't take them and ended up having hypomania and getting sent to the hospital again because I was stabbing myself in the arm with scissors and screaming that I wanted to kill myself. My dad called the police and then I agreed to go to the hospital and they kept me in the psych ward of like emergency overnight and like I was clearly very agitated and suicidal. They gave me Ativan and Haldol to like calm me down. And then I had to stay there. I stayed in that like room, like locked cell overnight. And then they took me to Dubai and I was admitted and I thank goodness only had to stay there for 3 days because my mom advocated for me to get out and just be at home, which I'm very thankful for. At the time, I wasn't thankful because I felt like they got me in there. Like my parents got me sent to the hospital and basically like you can't leave. Like there's a lawyer that can help you, but it's like weeks or a month until you can talk to him and then I don't know if that really helps anything. And I don't know how long they keep you in there if you don't have someone advocate for you, is like if it's like 3 weeks or something like that, but or until you're not suicidal anymore. But I wasn't happy with the meds they gave me there. They gave me Seroquel, which just made me very dizzy and sleepy and sedated, and I had to go to bed at 5 o'clock. And I was also worried about the weight gain on that. So I was like, fine, can I just take the lamotrigine? Like, that's what my psychiatrist said when I had a med review with the psychiatrist there. And so they said, yeah, but still sent me home with a prescription for Seroquel. But I had the prescription from my psychiatrist for the lamotrigine, and it takes a really long time to get on that. Like, you have to titrate up really slowly because it can cause this, like, horrible skin rash called Steven Johnson's disease. So no one wants that. So I was still really hypomanic and agitated and depressed, and I like smashed a cup and smashed a pitcher and threw things around our house and was just screaming about wanting to kill myself all the time. And then eventually it started working. I initially felt agitated but sedated on it, but that went away and I just felt really normal. And it allowed me to be on an antidepressant that helps me. And the SSRIs and the SNRIs didn't help me in particular. They help a lot of people, but what helped me was Wellbutrin. And that's what I was on before for 5 years. It was just that my mood wasn't stable. So then I could take it, and that was helping my mood. It helped the anxiety, which for some people it can cause anxiety. So it's all just like what works for you, and you got to try things out, which is super frustrating. So it took over a year for my mood to stabilize. I didn't sleep for like a year. I had the kind of insomnia where you can fall asleep, but you can't stay asleep. So I was sleeping for like 2 hours or up at like 1 or 2 in the morning or like 3. And I would just be like hypomanic and agitated and doing chores in this agitated way in the dark in the winter. It was not great. So that even this summer, it was still going on. And then just recently, it's started to stabilize and I can sleep sometimes, which is really nice.
Yeah, that is really nice. I feel like this is just gonna like throw a curve in the conversation, but I want to like revisit, I guess, your parents bringing you into the Dubé Center. You know, you mentioned that at the time you were, I don't know, not happy about it.
No, I was really mad at them.
But your parents being like people that you love and care about, and, you know, them seeing a lot of this, how do you feel about that? Like, I'm kind of interpreting some frustration, but I'm not sure if there's, you know, shame or guilt or anything like that.
About how I acted?
Sort of that, but also just like throughout a lot of you getting better.
My relationship with my parents got so much better. Once my mood was stable, my dad would get really angry at me if my mood was unstable and if I was suicidal. He had he's had depression, but he wasn't very understanding of my depression. He tried to commit suicide when he was 20, and after his brother actually did commit suicide. So he had a big fear that I would actually kill myself or so he just didn't want to see that happen. And I think his reaction to seeing me like that is anger, like really, really angry, till the point where I'm crying and telling him, like, stop yelling at me. My mom is very caring, very understanding, but this was very hard on her, because she cares so much and because she also has trauma. So to see her daughter experiencing that was probably really hard for her. And yeah, she just didn't want to see me suffering, I think. And that's all they can do is like go to the professionals. They can be caring towards me, but they can't solve my mental illness. So I think that's why they reacted the way they did, that they feel helpless when it gets to that point.
Mm-hmm. And that's completely understandable. You know, how did you feel about what was going on?
I felt bad that I was hurting my parents in that way, that I was like actively suicidal and hurting myself. Like, I felt at the time, it just felt like that's all I could do. That's all I could think about. And that's the only thing that I had to cope. I don't really know. Like, I just was so upset about the trauma all the time that I just wanted to die. And that was all I could think about. So yeah, I do have some guilt, I guess, about it now. But our relationship has healed, and my parents, I feel like they love me no matter what. Even when they put me in the hospital, I can see it now. But at the time, I was still pretty agitated and angry about that because I didn't want to be in there.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was going to help me.
And I mean, I know that was a leading question, giving you those emotions, but I just know, like, personally, when a lot of what I went through, I just always feel like shitty for the people around me, and I feel like, you know, I just need to do better, if that makes sense. So how did you find, you know, people other than your parents would react to you?
No one else knew. Like, none of my friends knew. My therapist knew. My psychiatrist knew. And they were understanding. Even the therapist where I slashed my arms and legs open, she was understanding. I didn't ever come see her again, but she was understanding, and we emailed each other, and I apologized, and she said that you're very strong, and like, you're dealing with a lot, and it'll get better for you with time, or something like that. Something very kind. And so it didn't end on, like, any negative kind of note. So I think the people that knew were all professionals, and they were very understanding. I didn't talk about this, or no one else saw me like this aside from my parents. Like, even my sister, she doesn't live here. She didn't know. So
have you opened up to people now?
Yes. Like, once I was feeling more stable, I did open up to some people that I felt close enough to, and they felt safe. Like, a few very close friends. A few professors, actually. I'm now telling this, I guess.
But I know that yesterday when we were speaking about doing this interview, you mentioned how, I think it was your massage therapist, right? She said that she had a similar experience. And I just think that, I don't know what to think about that. The fact that, you know, I don't want to say it's common, but the fact that you have found a lot of women that have experienced sexual violence, you know?
Yeah. So we're talking about massaging my neck, and that I've told her that I found it difficult, or that certain things I wasn't willing to do because of the trauma. And she had just said to me, some people who have trauma don't like having their necks touched. Are you okay with that? And that's when I came out with, no, my trauma is related to this, and there's only certain things that I'm okay with. And then later, I had told her that, yeah, I don't think I'm okay with it. Like, there was something that she wanted to do that would help my neck, but I would have to sign like a consent form for her to do that. And I was like, no, I just don't think I'm going to be able to do it. And then I blurted out my trauma just because I was like, I don't know. I felt like she needed to know why or something. And then she told me that she also had a boyfriend and he choked her. So there's been other experiences like that with like someone at school who said her boyfriend like would choke her and like hold her down basically and force her to have unprotected sex with him. Like, there's another person that I knew that, two people that the same thing, like their partner forced them to do sex acts that they didn't want to do, either with violence or threats. And other people I know that have just been like sexually assaulted in various ways. So yeah, like once you tell it, people often like say the Me Too thing. That's why it's out there. Like, yeah, yeah, same. I don't want to say like a lot of people have it, but more than you would think. Or you don't, the invisible disabilities thing. This isn't, no, I'm not walking around and everyone can see this. But once you say it, other people are willing to say it too.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in terms of resources, did you have anything other than therapy to recover from sexual violence?
Like, nothing that's specific, like therapy. But I the medication helped for sure, and I was very resistant to that, but I can say that once I found things that help and I don't have side effects, that really helped. And it helped me do things that I enjoy and actually enjoy them. I find running to be very therapeutic. I've always been a runner, and it helps everything. It improves my mood. It improves agitation when I'm agitated. It improves depression when I'm depressed. And it's just a place where I can really work out my thoughts and feelings and process things. Being in nature is helpful for me. I love riding my bike by the riverbank or going out to the swale. I do yoga now, which before it would just straight up give me trauma thoughts because you're going into your body, and that was always scary and just started the trauma thoughts for me. Trying to meditate or be mindful, there's too many of those racing thoughts. The trauma plus the bipolar plus the ADHD, those all can cause just these racing thoughts that I couldn't turn off. And all my racing thoughts were about the trauma. So doing things like that, I couldn't do. And now that I take medication and that I've worked on the trauma, I can do those things and not have intrusive thoughts. And I went for a massage this morning. I didn't have intrusive thoughts and we didn't talk or anything. And that's amazing for me that anything like that before would have caused me a lot of distress or panic even.
Mm-hmm. And that sounds very challenging to go through. I mean, I have never experienced sexual violence, so I can't really say anything. But, with that being so challenging and you saying you experienced trauma thoughts when you're in your body, what was that progress like for you? I know the first few steps would be hard, but how did you keep challenging yourself, to want to get back into your body and, do yoga or...
I think that you just keep going back to it. I think that you just... part of it was just accepting it and letting go of it little by little. And even before, I would run and cry. Just run and cry. Even when I was inside running at the field house, I would run and cry. And people saw me crying and I'd be like, fuck it. I don't care. I need to run and cry today. So I would prefer to be outside running and crying in the forest, but that wasn't possible in -50. So I think that was really helpful for me to go back to running. I wasn't running for a long time. I'd go ride my bike and all it would be was racing trauma thoughts. And then little by little, that just gets better and you get more used to being in the peaceful place of your mind. And how we were talking about the ADHD medication. I was this sounds really weird, but I felt deep peace for the first time in my life. Having all the things treated properly is getting me closer and closer to being able to be in my body, being able to work on the trauma, being able to let go and focus on the future. I had this with my psychiatrist talking about acceptance and forgiveness. The first time she had tried to talk to me about that, I was initially okay, but after filled with rage and I wasn't feeling better, so I couldn't accept it. And forgiveness got all mangled in my mind about she was saying that forgiveness isn't about having to directly forgive him or of course not saying what he did was okay. it's about accepting that you can't change the past and forgiving yourself. And that in that sense, the forgiveness in the sense of acceptance brings you freedom. So the second time we talked about this, I had this very big, like, emotional release. And I was like, again, thinking that sounded very airy-fairy to say that I think I'm having an emotional release. But she was like, you're releasing. And I was like, great. I have this wonderful holistic psychiatrist that works on like therapeutic things as well. She doesn't just give me meds and say, that's it. She's very holistic and really great at what I call the talking part. So, and the more my meds become stable and I don't have to change them all the time, we don't have to spend so much time working on that piece, the more we can work on the talking piece. And the more that I can release and let go and have someone be with me who makes me feel safe and unconditionally accepted, basically, the more you can have that unconditional acceptance for yourself. And you had a podcast where you talked about self-compassion. Like, that's what she talked about with me. Like, the 3 steps are like mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity. So she was talking about how you're not alone. You're not the only person that has these things, and that can be super helpful.
Yeah, especially, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but especially when you can speak to other women and, you know, they tell you that they have had similar experiences, you know?
I think that you can find some healing in that and in sharing your experiences and also sharing what's helped you. Like, I don't think there's one specific thing that helped me. It's all the things working together.
And, you know, this is going to be a very rough transition because, I don't know. I do want to ask you another question here. So how is it that, you know, your mental illnesses are affected by your period?
So, yeah, we talked about this and I said, yes, I'm fine with talking about this because my period affects it a lot. And I always knew this before I had any diagnoses that I like thought I had PMDD, which I do, but it was the bipolar, it was the ADHD, it was the trauma. It all comes up and gets worse right before my period. And all the times I've like cut myself and been sent to the hospital, had to talk to the police. It was all right before my period. So yeah, it affected my mood and it triggered bipolar symptoms for sure. And like I looked this up because you talked about, that you don't experience it as agitation. So some people experience hypomania and the depression of bipolar as agitation. So I had to look this up to be sure I was right about this. And so that's what was happening to me with my period. And my psychiatrist said this is very common. And you said you've had women that told you should talk about this on the podcast. So I was like, sure, I'll talk about it. So, and someone had told you that their ADHD meds don't work with their period. It just, they're less effective. So I found the ADHD meds help me so much. I thought my focus was just shit before my period and that this bad focus was just my period and that everyone has this. And then I started taking the Concerta and I was like, wow, my focus is so much better with my period. I can like focus and do my homework and my mood stabilized and the bipolar meds helped with not, you know, cutting myself and threatening to kill myself every time I had my period. Like eventually my mood just stabilized and I was amazed because I tried all these things to get rid of my period. Like I initially before any of the like with my psychiatrist and everything, I had seen a gynecologist because I told her on the phone because it was during COVID about my trauma because my doctor had referred me to her and told her I had trauma and that was affecting my period. And so I was like gonna get some options for like birth control or something to get rid of my period, thinking that would help. And it does help some women with PMDD. But mine was linked to bipolar and ADHD. So treating those helped my period be less dramatic. And I think my mood still goes off a little bit, but it's not like throwing me off the deep end. Like the trauma thoughts bother me more. And I think I'm just more easily emotional about that more than anything. But so I went on this drug called Oralisa that basically it's not birth control, but it stops ovulation, so it stops your period, but it puts you into menopause. So at a lower dose, it didn't help me. I still had a period and bleeding with ovulation, so that wasn't great. And then a higher dose would definitely put me into menopause. You'd have to do hormone replacement. There's the fear about osteoporosis, even at a really young age too, or like along the line after using this long term. So my gynecologist said that's not a good option for me, especially with history of an eating disorder. Like you can be more prone to osteoporosis, and I'm just a small person, so you can be more prone to osteoporosis. So then I tried taking birth control like continually, so you don't have a period, but all it did was give me my period for 3 months. So that was the second time I had tried birth control, and that's what happened. It was a low-dose birth control, and I didn't want to try a high-dose birth control. I had done that before, and I tried the patch, and IUDs weren't super popular at the time, but now I considered getting an IUD, but I was sick of having my period all the time, so I didn't, and then my mood stabilized on its own. So that's what ended up working for me, was actually the medications. Birth control can make like lamotrigine less effective too.
When your mood wasn't stabilized, what was it that, or how did the mental illnesses like work together to throw you into these agitated moods that you became hospitalized?
Yeah, it was, and I would also like for years leading up.
Do you mind just like talking to me?
Yeah, for years leading up to this, like I would get panic before my period. Like that's when I would have my panic attacks too, and that's when I would be really depressed and like crying in public. And it was the trauma, like just the trauma thoughts were worse, and I was more reactive and emotional to them, and because of that change in my hormones, like more prone to panic. And like they often treat that with like serotonin, like panic is treated with serotonin, and like PMDD is also treated with like SSRIs. So there was something connected there. And then eventually the bipolar started to like get worse and express itself. And in some ways, bipolar, it's obviously genetic, but there's often also an environmental factor. Like a lot of women with bipolar have like childhood trauma. So it was like 7 years after the end of my trauma, 14 years after the beginning of my trauma. So that could have been a factor in it expressing itself. But there was always a genetic predisposition, and no one in my family is diagnosed with bipolar, like my extended family at all. But there has to be some genetics somewhere. But that the bipolar agitation and my sleep going off and everything like that became linked to my period too. Like that's when it would make it worse, and that's very common. With women with bipolar is their periods to throw their mood off. And then the focus thing with the ADHD and the racing thoughts were linked to bipolar and ADHD and the PTSD. So it all just got linked up, and it's all just worse with my period. So that's why it led to being hospitalized and hurting myself and all those things.
When you were going through the trauma, did you find that you were having some of these experiences? Because I know that you said your relationship was, 7 years? So
just less than 7 years, yeah.
Yeah. Like when you were actively in that situation, did you find some of these things were happening to you?
Like my mood being off with my period or just in general?
I guess all of it.
So my mood wasn't off with my period until the last trauma with him and then the breakup. That's when my mood went off with my period. Like I had one period after that, and it was before that period that I attempted suicide. So I went to the hospital. And then from then on, my period and the trauma were linked, but my period stopped after that. I just didn't have periods for a while. I think it was the trauma and also just having a hard time eating because I was so upset all the time. And with my eating disorder, I didn't have a period for a good 10 years. So for half of that relationship, I didn't have a period. And then I had a very sporadic period for the rest of it. So that can be linked to eating. It can be linked to stress. It can be linked to I was partying a lot. I wasn't very healthy. So yeah, didn't have a period. And then I didn't have a period for a while after the trauma. But the period was linked to that first suicide attempt. And it all just got linked up. My mood, I was unstable with the Wellbutrin, and some of the suicidal thoughts that came with that were probably linked to the abuse in the relationship and feeling trapped and unhappy. And I know I was noticing what was wrong. I just didn't feel that I could do anything about it. That's how I felt at the time. And I had very low self-esteem. I really didn't think anyone else would want to be with me. And at the time, I guess that I felt that was better than nothing, which it definitely isn't. And if I was if I could go back and talk to that girl, I would be you're strong and you can do this on your own and you'll be better off without this relationship. But you can't change that. So I just have to have self-compassion that I was doing the best I could at that time.
Yeah. And that would have been scary, I guess, with your low self-esteem and everything going on. So what happened after you guys broke up?
I had no friends. All my friends were his friends. I don't know. I met one random friend and she was lovely, not in contact with any of his friends, but I would see them at the beach. I saw him at the beach once. I saw him one other time along the seawall, and I never wanted to see him again, which was scary for me, I guess. And I don't know. I continued to party, did some coke and drank, and I don't know, just not for any good reason, and did a bunch of mushrooms, and I don't know, tried to have some insight, but all it did was I felt great and confident, and then I had panic attacks about the trauma, and I got myself very disoriented riding my bike home from the beach in the dark and crying and screaming about the trauma. And I had to call my friend. She had taken the bus home and she had to come to my place and comfort me. I just, every single time I'd get distressed about the trauma. So that wasn't really helpful. And then I did a yoga teacher training to try to meet some people, and then I moved home. So yeah, after the suicide attempt, I stupidly thought I could date people, but I dated 2 people, but I wouldn't have sex with them. I knew that much about myself, and I didn't want to tell them about the herpes, so I wasn't ever going to have sex with them. And then they just stopped talking to me. So that's what happened. And since then, I haven't dated anyone. I have definitely not slept with anyone. When this happened to me, like when I started dating him, I had slept with one other person once and it was very safe. And this is like the next thing that happened to me. So that's pretty much all that I know of relationships was that.
Yeah, and that is a horrible thing to go through, you know, but it definitely sounds like the place that you're in now, like I'm honestly impressed that you can speak about it like openly on the podcast and even being able to speak about it because, you know, like you were saying how you used to have these extreme adverse reactions to thinking about the trauma. So
yeah, when I first told my psychiatrist, I had panic and screaming after. I like went for a bike ride, called my therapist when I'm not supposed to call her. Obviously, she wasn't there, but I left a message. I called the sexual assault center. I biked home. I ended up like burning myself, hitting myself in the head with a hard metal object and against the wall. And I burned myself on my arm like seriously 20 times. And that was from telling her. And then another time when I had to tell it to different psychiatrists for getting the TMS, which we haven't talked about, but for getting another treatment. And afterwards, I was screaming in my car, like construction workers saw me and heard me, and I didn't care. I called my mom and just screamed. I somehow drove myself home. And then was like screaming and crying and cutting myself and hitting myself in the head. And now I can tell you for sure this isn't going to happen. So you don't have to worry. But yesterday when we talked as well, I was like, I can tell you that the rest of my day is going to be fine. And it was. It was totally fine.
So I know that we've talked a lot about it like throughout, but what do you find was the most helpful for you to recover from not just the trauma, but the mental illnesses and some of your experiences because of them?
What was the most helpful for me?
Or I guess like, what, it doesn't have to be one thing.
Okay, that's kind of what I said is all the things working together, the things I can do by myself and now can enjoy without racing trauma thoughts because of the medications, finding a psychiatrist that I trust and that I feel wants to help me and will talk to me and not just give me medication. Having a really great therapist that we have a really good, like therapeutic alliance, like our relationship is really good. Especially now that I'm not emotionally dysregulated. Like it's a lot easier to work on the trauma because she knows it won't make me emotionally dysregulated. Like she doesn't want to do anything that would be like psychologically harmful to me, even though like it's supposed to be beneficial. But if you're very upset after, that's not helping anything. So I think all the things, like I think it's still very much a work in progress. Also, like doing things with people is helpful. Like when you have trauma, it kind of shut me down to other people. And like you said, feeling very different and separate and apart and not being able to be open in relationships or comfortable. And I think developing friendships where I feel safe and friendships where I felt I could tell them a bit about my experiences, and just having relationships like volunteering with Pure Health, like having professors that are encouraging, like all of these things really help. There's the social aspect, there's the working on the trauma aspect, there's the finding enjoyment in the present aspect, there's the focusing on the future and like my goals, and having actual hope for the future. Like with depression, I was totally hopeless. Like you don't give a fuck about the future. You don't want the future. You just want to die. So being able to enjoy life, enjoy relationships, like doesn't mean everything is perfect for sure. It's still very much a work in progress. But also being able to have gratitude for like what I have. Like, there are things that I wish didn't happen, but I can't change those things. But there's a lot in my life to be grateful for and to enjoy. There's a lot of things about life that are beautiful. So when I was depressed, when I was stuck in the trauma, I couldn't appreciate those things. And now gradually coming out of it, gradually letting go of that, it allows you to be, I think, more grateful and more appreciative of the things in life that are good.
What are you grateful for now, Veronica?
Well, I'm grateful for the positive relationships in my life. I'm very grateful for my parents. I'm grateful for my sister and my really wonderful, cute little nephew. I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to go back to school and that I have the privilege of seeing a therapist and a psychiatrist and having such wonderful relationships with them. I'm like grateful and appreciate my friends. I'm grateful and appreciative of just the people that I've met that are willing to support me and to share their experiences. And just like the beauty of like the natural world. I find that so healing. Like having a body that can run and do yoga and like see the sun, like all of these small things that we really take for granted. Being able to be aware of that again is really important, I think.
And, you know, being able to appreciate it outside of hypomania.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'm going to end this interview soon. I just have a couple more like thoughts or questions here. You know, do you have any advice for people, you know, who may be experiencing some of the things that you have or that you are having?
That you're not alone in your suffering. You're not alone at all. And you don't have to struggle and suffer in silence. And to be kind and caring and compassionate to yourself. And that I have this really nice quote from Viktor Frankl. He like went through the Holocaust and he has a like type of therapy called logotherapy, which is about finding meaning in life experiences.
I hate to cut you off, but you're not speaking into the mic.
So, and he says to live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in the suffering. And just about gratitude, there was this quote from a book I read called Buy Yourself the Fucking Lilies. And I was like, not so me. And after I had that release with my psychiatrist, I went and bought myself some fucking lilies. And her quote is that I began to realize that I did indeed have a lot to be grateful for. That didn't mean I didn't also have trauma in my life. It certainly didn't mean I had worked out all of my issues. The trauma and the gratitude were able to live in the same space together. Little by little, I pulled the golden thread of gratitude out from the blanket of pain I usually wrapped myself in. So that quote for me was inspiring to be able to say, everything is not perfect. Everything is never going to be perfect, but things will get better. And so that's what I'd like to say to people, even if it seems right now like everything is wrong and it's never going to get better, it will get better. And that you're strong enough to put in the effort. It's not easy, but everyone has the strength within them to overcome whatever they've been through and to feel better. And that everyone deserves to feel good and that you deserve to feel good. So that's my advice.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. So if there's nothing else you want to go over, or we can end it there, or unless you have questions or...
I feel like that's a great place to end.
Alrighty, well, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So hopefully you guys liked this episode. Make sure to check out our website in the description and subscribe on whatever platform you're on. You'll also find some resources and references we used for this episode in the description. And once again, we are not medical professionals and you should see your doctor if you're concerned about your mental well-being. We'll see you next time.